Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. This is terrific, and congratulations to all of you, because I understand that you were all nominated for your outstanding qualities as teachers, to have this opportunity to come and participate in this program. And so congratulations to you. Give yourselves a hand. My name is Trish Newhall, and I am the Associate Director of the Landmark School Outreach Program. The first thing, you've probably all looked up here already, the most important thing to keep in mind is that children, and I would say adults as well, thank you, who have some executive function weaknesses, the single thing that they have in common is inconsistency. And so it's really important as teachers for us to remember that, because when we have students in our classroom and they have a week where they're having a great week and then they fall apart, what do? Well, why can't you do it? You did it last week. What's the matter with you? Well, that's part of the problem. And that we just need to remember that that is part of the problem. It's not that they're necessarily, have lost motivation. They're just not able to do what we want them to do consistently all the time. So, all right. There's my title slide. You'll see up there the cogs say activation and focus, effort and emotion, memory and action. And if you've looked around at the boards around the room, you'll see those same words. They're pictured here as cogs. You're going to see them again as a list. And these are the facets of executive function that we're going to be revisiting throughout today and tomorrow. And I put them up here as cogs just as a visual reminder that they all drive each other. So even though the list is easier to read, that all of these facets are connected together. So what is executive function? Here's a nice little whopper of a definition for you. And it's the brain's ability, it's all in the brain, and there are keywords here which you can circle on your slide. It is the brain's ability to access and coordinate, both of those, to access and coordinate the cognitive and emotional processes needed to initiate, sustain, monitor, and adapt the behaviors and attitudes, and we'll talk about that in a minute, required to achieve a goal. Whew, it's a mouthful, but there's your definition with a lot of key words in there that we're going to talk about. The really short definition is executive function is what allows us to pursue goals. All right, but there's a lot of processes underneath that are required for us to be successful. So the first I want to talk about is goal-oriented behaviors. What does that mean? All right, so executive function isn't just school. All right, executive function involves everything that we do, from the moment we wake up in the morning until we go to sleep at night. Our executive functions are not engaged when we're sleeping. All right, it's a conscious activity because it's accessing and coordinating all of these processes for goal-oriented behavior. So there's a picture up there of somebody tying their shoes. It takes executive function to tie your shoes. And if you have ever watched a child learning how to tie his or her shoes, you know it's a major complicated process. And something happens over time, and that process becomes automatic. So that by the time they're in middle school, most of them can, kneel down on the soccer field and not even look at their shoe because they're watching where the ball is going, they're tying their shoe. Well, how did that happen? Okay, they developed what's called automaticity. And we'll talk about how that happens in the brain in a little bit. But so some goal-oriented behaviors are routine, and we don't think about them. Reading is another one. People who are fluent readers have developed automaticity. Okay, the comprehension is a little different, but just decoding words on a page, you go through the process. You have to learn how to do it. You practice and you practice and you practice, and eventually it becomes automatic. It's like tying a shoe. It's a skill. All right, comprehension is a little different, but it becomes automatic. And that's a routine. Brushing your teeth, taking a shower, eating, walking, skipping rope, all of those kinds of things. These are things that when we first start to learn, it's a goal-oriented behavior that we learn and practice until it becomes routine. And that all requires executive function. Other goal-oriented behaviors remain complex forever. So things like, you know, in your lives, let's say, you know, you're planning a dinner party, right? Or you are getting ready to go on a camping trip. All right? Or in school, you're writing a research paper or doing a project. Those are complex activities that aren't routine, right? That require really conscious thought and planning and clear sense of what the goals are in order to be successful. And they require knowledge of how to do it, planning, the strategies, self-monitoring. Am I progressing toward my goal? And if I am, great, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. Am I not progressing toward my goal? Uh-oh, what should I do differently? You know, and can I change my plan? Flexibility in order to achieve them. So executive function involves goal-oriented behaviors and, guess what? Attitudes. And this is a part that often doesn't get talked about in what I think is a productive way. A lot of students who struggle with executive function issues and attention deficit disorder, and there's all kinds of overlap between that we'll talk later, are often accused of being lazy. And that's a very complex process. They're not. It relates very much to some interferences in the brain process that can ultimately lead to students just giving up, and we'll talk about that later as well. But we need, in order to achieve goals, is the right kinds of attitudes. Now, when we develop automaticity, tying shoes, for example, right? We have a history of success with the activity. We might have gone through some frustration during the learning process, but we've been successful. We've learned how to do it, and we have all kinds of positive attitudes about it. We feel good, you know? And we go into that activity and other kinds of related activities, you know, with some confidence that we're going to be successful. And yeah, learning is difficult, but I can do it. More complex and challenging goals are really taxing on our emotional processes, and they require an enormous amount of positive self-talk to get us through those. And what happens is, for many students and adults, okay, I mean, I'm just saying students, but this is really true of everyone, we can fall into these patterns of negative self-talk. Or if we have failed before, we have a history of real struggle or negative feedback on activities that we've done, we're going to go into a goal-oriented task without that positive attitude and confidence. And that changes everything, because much of what our executive function does is we monitor ourselves through this internal self-talk. And it can be positive, you know, yes, I can do this, I know I can do this, or it can be negative. You know, you're so stupid, you're never going to be able to do this. And we have to be very conscious as teachers of what kids are saying to themselves in their own heads, so that we can help them develop the goal-oriented attitudes that are going to allow them to achieve their goal. So here's an analogy for executive function. This is Dr. Thomas E. Brown, and I would encourage you to go to his website, which is basically drthomasebrown.com. His website has a lot of material on it, and he has a brand new book, which I just got, so I haven't finished reading it yet. But he is the one whose facets of executive function I have been using. These words that are around on the boards are his formulation of the executive functions. Pretty much all of the researchers agree that executive function is goal-oriented behavior, but they all have different names for the different facets of executive function, and they range from Thomas E. Brown's 6 facets, which I really like, and they're simple and they make sense to me, to 28 facets of executive function. And so it can be very confusing, and I decided a long time ago to just stick with Thomas Brown's. He's very accessible, and he's got a lot of great stuff on his website, so it's a good resource for you to learn more. But he uses the analogy of the executive function is like a conductor, all right? And so if you think about going to a symphony orchestra, you could have an entire group of very talented musicians, highly skilled musicians. If they don't have a conductor who is capable, who can get them all started at the same time, keep them on tempo, have them, feed in the strings and bring in the brass when it needs to come in to achieve the ultimate goal of the music, then the piece is not going to be successful. And so keep that in mind with executive function. If you think about the conductor of the orchestra, it's pulling in what's needed and when and coordinating it. So it's just another way to think about executive function. And I'm going to show you a video in a second. And I just want to stop there and ask you to spend a few seconds thinking about the students in your classroom. And I would say, to think about the kids in your classes that exasperate you. Use that word, that exasperate you because you're not quite, you're like, oh, what do I do? How can I get this kid on board? Think about those kids. Even if you think about one of them as we go through talking about executive function, and even really through the day, what can you use, of these kinds of strategies? These kinds of strategies are good for everybody, but they're really essential for those kids who are struggling for reasons that might not be totally clear to you. And some of those reasons may be because they have weaknesses or deficits in these executive skills. So how does executive function start? It starts out when we're born. The moment we're born, our executive function begins to develop. And when we're little, I'm going to probably need to get over to my computer there. Sorry, Ann, because I think I need to click on this. When we're little, our parents provide the external executive function for us. When children are very young, their parents and their caretakers and the environment in which they're growing up are contributing to the development of their executive function, their goal-oriented behavior. All right, think about a young baby, the goal-oriented behavior. I'm going to cry because, you know, I'm hungry or I'm uncomfortable or I need my diaper changed or whatever. And if they're in an environment that's responsive and helping them, they cry, they get what they want, they've achieved their goal, and they start to learn that, so that every time it happens, they have that same strategy to get what they want. If they don't, if they fail because the environment around them is not responsive, they try something else, and it has a profound effect on their development, both emotionally but also cognitively. And we know that through research that, you know, children who have been abused or neglected have all kinds of issues as they grow up and grow older. So from the time babies are born, their brains are developing executive skills and learning goal-oriented behavior. And the parents, I mean, some of it's just physical, but also it's expectations, right? It's parents modeling, teaching, instructing, practicing. Think about tying your shoes, right? I can remember being a little girl, I'd go to the barber shop with my father, and I would kneel on the floor and practice tying his shoes, you know, and they all had little strategies for me, you know, and they were trying the bunny ears this and wrap it around, and they all had this instruction, and I would practice and practice. And the day I actually successfully tied the shoe, I was on the floor in the barber shop, and I remember the barber gave, I don't know how old I was, but, you know, he gave me 2 pieces of bazooka bubble gum as a, you know, and it was really exciting. But people model, instruct, it doesn't have to just be the parents. And it's that constant reminder. And one of the reasons I love this video is at the end, she says, good night, and she says, and tomorrow we will do this all again. And it's not so different as teachers. And so from the time kids come into school, just the goals are different. But we are constantly setting goals for students, instructing them how to achieve those goals, and practicing and practicing and practicing and giving feedback. And all of this develops their executive function skills. And the more successful they are, the more successful they'll be in the future. And so one of the issues with early intervention and really focusing on young children is if we can get younger children successful in all these different ways early on, it is going to allow them to be much more successful in the future. Part of that is because of the attitudes that develop about learning and about being in a classroom. And so I just want you to, you know, think about her. Her name is Anita Renfro. I think it's called the Mom Song, if you ever want to show it to anyone. I've gotten a lot of good laughs over the years with this, but it always reminds me of the importance of that constant repetition. And eventually, any of you who are parents, you see things eventually start to stick. I have an 11-year-old and a 16-year-old. The 11-year-old's not totally there yet, but you know, the 16-year-old, after years of, you know, saying to him, when an adult comes in the room, you stand up, make eye contact, shake hands, how to do, like the whole manners thing. And it stunned me a couple of years ago to see him actually do it. And you know, what happened was, and he does it pretty consistently now, very proud of it, but what happened was it went from external executive function with me, you know, probably completely embarrassing him as a kid, saying, come and say hi to Mrs. Smith, like in front of poor Mrs. Smith, and say, you know, shake hands. Nice, you know, like really that instruction, it went from that external to the internal. And he did it himself. And we see that with all these different things as children grow up. And what we want to have happen academically is the same thing. So in the classroom, most of us are providing a lot, particularly in the younger grades, are providing a lot of external executive function for our children who are sitting in front of us. And what we need to keep in mind as teachers is what strategies can we use in the classroom to help get that executive function that we're providing to become internalized with our students? And how do we do that? We develop routines. All right, we teach them strategies and we develop routines and we practice, 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 practice.